Thanks, Max. While those slides are coming up, I'm glad to see that.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Arturo and the Admiral after me both have slides because I have slides, and if you didn't catch the similarities, Admiral Atkins and Commander Ramirez, General Ospina, General Tibau, all of the military guys have slides, so you can learn two lessons from that. One, if you want to hamstring any military from any country in the world, just put a virus in their computer that destroys PowerPoint. Or if you're a conference organizer and you have too many military speakers, just tell them no slides and they'll drop out themselves. But we appreciate the opportunity to talk here. And I know we had Southcom and Northcom, and I didn't know why that only one component of one of those COCOMs was invited to speak, but I imagine it was because the Army War College wanted to get the Army plug in. So I appreciate the nod there, Max. Next slide, please. I put this up, just a quick background on Army South, because I was asked to talk about what Army South is doing in the region, and if you know Army South or think you knew Army South, it's probably not the Army South you remember from just a couple of years ago. We trace our presence in the region all the way back to the Army force that was building the canal and maintained that continuous presence all the way from when Southcom moved out in 97, and then when our South finally moved out in 99 and went to Puerto Rico. Stayed there for a number of years until that place became untenable, and then finally moved to San Antonio, where we currently reside. We were also, at that time, between 2003 and 06, moved out from under Forces Command and made an Army Service Component Command, as you can see up there from the 2006 slide. Next slide, or 2006 entry. All of the ASCC's Army Service Component Commands went under a restructuring called 5.4, which kind of mirrored the structure across all of these Army components to COCOMs, which we started in 2008 and then finished in 2011. In the meantime, in the summer of 2010, right after I got there, General Casey said, "Hey, Army North and South, why don't you guys merge?" And we both told him we thought that was a bad idea, and he said, "Hey, noted, do it by October." So from August till October, we were planning, and then that action was subsequently canceled, which our missions are just so different. It was really a good idea to have two Army service components for those COCOMs. And then we've all talked about the DoD-wide budget reductions, and we don't know where we're headed. Quite frankly, merging may be back on the table again. We just don't know. Okay, so with that introduction, next slide. All right, some of the capabilities, I'm not going to read them for you, but I do want to highlight a couple. The fourth one down, Admiral Atkins touched on it yesterday about the Southcom exercise program. What Southcom actually does is use its components as executive planning agents. And I'm going to talk a couple of exercises later in the brief, but we are the executive planning agents for quite a few of them, and I'm sure that you guys are familiar with some of those exercises. The second to the last bullet, we are the link between speaking Army, where we are resourced from, and speaking COCOM operational stuff between Southcom. So we as a service component are really answering to two bosses. And the last bullet, Dr. Mora touched on it yesterday, we really see the long-term relationships have come a long way since 2003, and that is one of our expressed capabilities and really kind of one of our missions is to make sure we keep and maintain and sustain relations with the partner armies. This is component specific here in the region. Next slide. This has probably been talked the last 2 days. I would only show you this because the way we view the operating environment is how we end up planning and conducting our activities. So this is a one-slide shot of all of the different threats or possibilities of happenings in the AOR that we've discussed, and you can break them down really into three large groups: natural disasters, mass migration, and illicit activities. You see the yellow call-out box. That's our State Department still defines Sendero Luminoso and the FARC as terrorist organizations, so that's why that's on there. And we show this slide to other fora too. In fact, we use it to educate our headquarters department of the Army about what we're doing with Southcom, because as it was mentioned, not a whole lot of attention sometimes gets placed our way when you have explicitly stated we need to pay more attention to the Pacific and to the Middle East. And I say all this, you wrap this up with social stagnation that can kind of create more openings for criminal organizations, and you have this environment that we're all familiar with. And I would say, I don't remember who mentioned it yesterday, but there are Islamic terrorist organizations at work in our AOR. They do fundraise, they do provide logistics support. So I'll say that for what it's worth, but there is no evidence of planning activities to carry out any kind of operations in the AOR that we can speak of here. Next slide. Okay, I said I was going to get to this, the Army South Campaign Support Plan. It really kind of speaks Army up one side because the Army is interested in the campaign or how we are actually having, our military policy with a country. You heard it mentioned a couple of times, we broad brush a policy and we don't have a policy for a country. Well, kind of think of this as a policy for a country, but we are also, if you look at all of the national guidance that Southcom puts together for military objectives for its job, we are also the Army portion that carries those that fall to us from our component, or for our combatant command. So as Southcom objectives, understanding that Southcom is primarily focused on the functional military objectives, and the Army really is focused on country support plans. That leaves us with basically 3 lines of operation, and I'll speak a little military here, and you can see those 3 down at the bottom, and I'm going to briefly touch on each one, and then I'll wrap it up. Okay, so this is what Army South is doing in the region. Next slide, please. Contingency response preparedness. I mean, we are Southcom's platform. We Army South are Southcom's platform of choice as a deployable core to a joint task force headquarters if it's needed in the AOR. If DOD is called upon to support most things in the region, then that the nucleus of whatever becomes of that will likely come from Army South, and we maintain a deployable contingency command post, and quite frankly, a larger main command post that can deploy. The Haiti deployment back in 2010 that was just getting over when I got there in the summer showed that there was a lot of good things and a lot of room for improvement that came out of that. But what it also highlighted was the gaps that we cannot fill ourselves. And so whereas this line of effort is really an internally focused thing where we are completing an assigned mission, it also seeks to integrate the cooperation of partner nation. And you can see some of the platform there that are listed, the Fuerzas Aliadas Humanitarias exercise, Panamex. We seek to get these activities into the Army staff talks, and we do 4 that on behalf of the Chief of Staff of the Army, and there's 3 listed there from this area, countries that we consider security exporters that we have talks with for this particular line of effort of contingency response preparedness. Next slide. You've heard this talk the last two days as well. This is Southcom's #1 priority, countering transnational organized crime, and is specifically focused on Central America. You can see the platforms there that by which we carry out activities in this. We also weave some of these into our staff talks. We support the Theater Special Ops Command. SOC South, which is in Homestead, does do a bulk of the work, but we do, if you look all the way down to the bottom one, we do a lot of the help in the basic soldier techniques and skills things and SOC South builds on them for a more robust force if the partner nation is interested in partnering. You see Joint Task Force Bravo. Many of you know that was created a long time ago, and it's on the Honduran air base of Sotocano, and through Central Skies, We do have OSD counter-drug money, 1004 money, with the funds and the authorization to run counter-narcotic endgames using those assets in Sotocano, and that's what Central Skies is about. But I'd like to put something in perspective here with CTOC, and you've heard it spoken both on the political side and on the state side and also on the military side. It was from a panel question that came up yesterday about sustained commitment. How much can this commitment be sustained? And I would give you one anecdote. In April of 2000, I was a younger foreign area officer just arriving at Southcom shortly after Plan Colombia had been approved by President Clinton. And we got to writing the DOD support for Colombia's Plan Colombia. And everybody knows that it was the military portion of Plan Colombia that got the most attention, but it was not the majority of the plan. And it became in vogue during that time to talk about how long is this going to take? And the answer was usually, about a decade before this becomes a police issue. And here we are 12 years later with the sustained commitment that we have had in Colombia, and it is still not just a police issue. So I say that to put it in perspective of what's going on with the vastly more complex problem of Central America, where we have multiple threats versus what we all kind of looked at as the FARC being the single threat. We have multiple countries versus just working with Colombia, and so I think this highlights even more the need for security exporting countries such as Chile, such as Brazil, such as Colombia, to work either multilaterally or bilaterally with the partners in Central America to address some of these concerns that what we've been talking about for the last 2 days. Next slide, please. Theater security cooperation, you heard the NORTHCOM J9 talking about that. It's kind of our day-to-day activities. A couple points. You can see all of the platforms that we use to conduct those cooperative activities. I would say that under the Distinguished Visitor Program at Army South, we have a unique opportunity to help or to reach out and touch a specific group of Army commanders. And in March of last year, General Trombitas invited up the commanders of Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras, and the four of them and General Trombitas had 2 days of very, very frank discussions about what was going on in Central America and their views of it. And to be quite frank, to a man, they said we had not met each other all at the same time. And so it was a great opportunity that it wasn't, hey, what can we give you? It's like, hey, let's talk about how we can deal with this together. I see I'm at 12 minutes and I'm almost done. Dr. Downey mentioned that if you haven't followed Mexico lately, you would have been interested to hear what the commander said yesterday. Our general just got a note from the NORTHCOM 3-star via SOUTHCOM requesting for Mexico to come visit Army South as well, because they really want to be synchronized and pooling resources and making sure that we're all moving forward in the same direction, and also that Mexico, if you were also not aware, is the chair of the the Conference of the American Armies for the next cycle, and has put an interesting proposal on the table of having an extraordinary commanders conference. Usually once every 2 years. They're going to have one this December, and there will only be 2 specialized conferences between now and then, one being rule of law, which we have talked about today, which is going to be run by the U.S. Our South JAG is going to spearhead that one, and Colombia's special conference on emerging threats. So those 2 conferences are going to inform this extraordinary commanders meeting in December, which we also think are very important. And incidentally, why our South is in this, when the commander of our Army or our Chief of Staff is up here at D.C. is several years ago, Headquarters Department of the Army divested itself of the CAA planning cell, and it has been down at Army South and has been basically run for the Chief of Staff of the Army out of Army South. And so we are the direct CAA link with all of the partner nations back up to our Army. Next slide. I'm not going to go over exercises. A lot of you know these or have participated and for a variety of different purposes in those lines of engagement or lines of operation. We seek to partner because no one can do it alone, right? So humanitarian assistance, disaster relief in Fahum, peacekeeping initiatives come out in PKOA, defense of the Panama Canal, and also possible disaster response for Panamex, which many of the countries in here are participating in, and you can see the two that don't participate in any of those exercises. And lastly, next slide. So, kind of summing it all up, our number one bullet is our number one bullet. We are prepared to be the core of a joint task force headquarters when called upon. It was touched on about limited resources. We seek to engage focus countries, countries that can export security, and quite frankly, in 13, 14, and the near future, the funding is going to be quite limited for kind of a peanut butter spread across every country, and it's just not going to happen. Through all this, we seek to build these national defense and security institutions by pointed engagements, as Dr. Daly Hayes brought up. It's quality versus quantity. It's not going out to do things just to do things. That was tried for many years, and we don't want to try to get a different solution by doing the same thing. And of course, CTOC is the flavor of the month, if I don't want to sound flippant, but that's a serious national interest of the United States, and it's our combatant command's primary its primary goal, primary priority right now. It is number one priority right now. And with that, I think that's the last one.
Okay, this is a good example. This is a good example of an alliance and how to completely lose control of a panel. But it also is a definite force multiplier, and it's worth considering seriously. Next, Admiral, please. Thanks.
We get some slides back there? Excellent. Well, first let me thank the organizers of the Colloquium for allowing me to share the floor with such distinguished academics, learned professors and doctors, all in this field. It's an honor for me to be up here. I was asked to make a presentation by Jay Cope, and he asked me to address the question, is there a Canadian model for adapting traditional defense tools to new conditions in the hemisphere? And I find that when I looked at the latest revision of the agenda, I find that the mere act of agreeing to speak, he is interpreted as a declaration for the affirmative statement. However, we will see what you think. Next, please. So Canada's engagement in the hemisphere is relatively recent, and our defense interest in the region even more so. In the next, I was going to say 15 minutes, but 10 or less, I will attempt to discuss Canadian interests and approaches in the hemisphere, and will conclude by reflecting on the main tenets of our approach. That is, that it's coordinated with whole-of-government partners, it's coordinated with partner countries, it is modest, enduring, and reciprocal, and that's our mantra for how we engage, and it's considerate of the defense-security nexus. I'll leave it to your judgment if this approach is either sufficiently unique or coherent enough to be considered a Canadian model in the context of our discussions here. Next. The Americas have in this last decade become a foreign policy priority for the Government of Canada. In fact, it's notable that the Government of Canada has only two formal defense and security strategies, the Arctic strategy and the America strategy. The existence of a Canadian-America strategy is not solely altruistic. Even apart from trade interests, security in the hemisphere is important to us because most of the cocaine in Canada comes from the hemisphere. Urban gangs from countries in the region are increasingly establishing links with gangs in Canada, and over 4 million Canadians travel to the Americas for business or tourism every year, and there are over 500 flights per week from Canada to the region during the peak tourism season. This, in fact, makes our interests not that much different from a lot of others' interests in the region. Thus, Canada is committed to ensuring a prosperous, secure, and democratic hemisphere where Canadians can live, work, trade, and play with some peace of mind. Might even wish to consider the common interests in this as indicating an interest in a Western Hemisphere security system, in the sense that these issues are not unique and they're not indigenous to either Central America or South America, but are something that originates in the region but is not limited to the region. And so this begs the question of how one thinks about systems, and this is where I revert to my engineering background and start to think in engineering analogies. There's a number of ways you can look at a system. The system can be viewed externally as a black box into which go some inputs and out of which come some predictable response, although not necessarily simple, based on given input. Or you could view a system from an internal perspective as with clear engagement of constituent parts and interactions. Of course, for a system to be viewed properly as a system, you have to consider both of these perspectives. Next. The interest in the Americas has been personally underscored on several occasions by the Prime Minister of Canada. In July of 2007, he traveled to 4 countries of the region, and when he was in Chile, he delivered a major speech outlining our new approach to Latin America and the Caribbean, at which time he stressed that Canada is a country of the Americas, that engagement in our hemisphere is a critical international priority for the government, and that Canada is committed to playing a role in the Americas in the long term. Next. The Department of National Defense is but one of a number of key departments and agencies implementing and supporting this engagement. Others include Public Safety, the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, the Canadian International Development Agency, and the Department of Justice. This is an important point, that Canada's engagement in the region is a whole-of-government coordinated effort. And the whole of government is working together to advance Canada's broad priorities in the Americas, but we are mindful of the need to ensure that our engagement in the hemisphere brings about tangible results, particularly in the light of global economic constraints. Because this panel is about the application of traditional defense tools to new conditions in the hemisphere, I'd like to take the next few minutes to elaborate on the tools that Canada uses. These range from high-level engagements and visits, formal defense arrangements, international placements, and strategic policy dialogue, to capacity building, operational engagement, and defense diplomacy. As an aside, there is the implied suggestion in this question that these are non-traditional applications of traditional defense tools. Although I'd say from a naval point of view, I might suggest that these are just continuing expansion and extension to other arms of the service of the broad international engagement, which is part of the common peacetime business of naval forces. Next. Our priorities in the Americas in general are to deepen cooperation with and build the capacities of our key partners, to contribute to the strengthening and effectiveness of civil-military governance, to enhance Canadian security through support to counter narcotics operations, and to reform and reposition hemispheric defense institutions. So what are we doing to support these priorities? Let me note from the outset that the scale of activities is modest. I believe this is also an important aspect of Canada's approach to defense engagement in the region. As a bilingual and multicultural country, we recognize that we have much to learn about the diverse culture of the region, and that we are unlikely to achieve the understanding and relationships we seek through short-term initiatives. Thus, in the context of limited resources, we prefer initiatives that are modest but sustainable, bringing about enduring results while fostering reciprocal relationships that are mutually beneficial to all involved partners. Next. The Military Training Cooperation Program is another key Canadian activity in the hemisphere, and its reputation is firmly established. MTCP currently devotes about 30% of its budget to 21 countries of the hemisphere, which is shown here with the years in which they entered into the program. MTCP contributes to the transformation of hemispheric armed and security forces into transparent and accountable institutions by giving courses on military justice and ethics, civil-military relations, defense resource management, transparency, gender and minority integration, and military education. Next. Next, please. In the interest of keeping on time, I'll skirt over the next couple of slides, but sufficient to say that both in terms of bilateral dialogue and high level of engagement among both our military and civil leadership are ways that we are engaging in the region. Next. Canada has particularly an affinity for and belief in the use of multilateral organizations, as is demonstrated by our membership and engagement with the OAS, CDMA, by the very fact that we put forward a candidate to stand as chairman of the IDB, and also is shown in a number of exercises we participate in the region. Next. In terms of operations, Canada's made a contribution to MINUSTA and had some 2,000 CF members and 2 ships involved in the aftermath of Haiti's devastating 2010 earthquake, and engages frequently with the Joint Interagency Task Force South, doing counter-drug traffic in the maritime and airspaces of the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and Atlantic and Pacific approaches. We're also engaged in courses and exchanges throughout the region in both directions, reciprocal and training courses, and putting staff members into hemispherical educational institutions such as WINSEC and IADC. And we're also about to start a training engagement with the Chilean Navy in terms of having some of our junior naval officers sail in Chilean Navy ships. Next. In addition, partnerships with other countries include ministerial bilateral discussions, engagement in Permanent Joint Board and Defense and the Military Cooperation Committee, and other activities within the region. Next. The main challenge in the region, as has been alluded to by a number of speakers over these 2 days, is rising instability in Central America, due mainly to the influence and activities of the transnational criminal organizations. This is a problem for all of us due to the spiral of negative effects, such as the social costs of drugs on our streets, the effects of instability on business investments in the region, and the effects of violence on tourism. These concerns are most prominent for Canada in Guatemala and Belize. Up to now, D&D and CF's involvement in Central America has been limited to the Military Training Cooperation Program, but we're now looking at how we can increase our engagement in the region. To ensure a comprehensive strategy in the region, contacts with the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Public Safety, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are ongoing to ensure a coordinated approach to Canadian engagement and capacity building in the Americas, particularly in Mexico and Central America, where the nexus between security and defense activities is especially apparent. Of course, we'll be looking to develop partnerships with other key hemispheric actors. By increasing our involvement, we're hoping to enhance our own internal D&D CF capacity so that more Canadians will have a better understanding of the region and will have acquired the language skills so necessary to further engagement. Starting with modest aims, we're hoping to build this engagement capability in a way that is sustainable. To return to the theme of a Western Hemisphere security system, Ambassador Villagrán this morning said that small countries have to use all their resources. I would suggest that this is also true for large countries that are sparsely populated, and so that there isn't, in our minds, quite a similarity or an analogy between the challenges that we face in the Arctic and those in Amazonia. In the same way that there is concern about militarization of public security, but which might be viewed with less concern as being military support of public security. Similarly, there's a debate in Canada which is anti-militarization of the Arctic, and the response in Canada is it's not about militarization of the Arctic, it's about the military in the Arctic. Because the way that Canada views this in terms of the defense and security nexus is that defense capability and capacity is a national asset. A country's defense forces, and I would suggest this applies to many countries in the region, if not all of them, represents a unique pool of manpower, discipline, communications, and mobility. And therefore, this is something that needs to be considered as an asset for the whole country's needs, if you like, in the service of the state. In Canada, we have very clear rules about how this is used in support of the state and respect for other government department mandates, and we have clear rules of engagement on the use of the military in aid of civil power. But we do not see there being a fundamental conflict between the use of the military in support of national security. Next. So, to wrap up and to return to the original question, is there a Canadian model? If not a model per se, I hope I will have illustrated for you what we believe is an evolving, systematic, and coherent approach. As this continues to evolve, I expect that it will continue to feature a coordinated interdepartmental approach that we use now, engaging whole-of-government, community, and Canadian stakeholders, both provinces, business, academia, and civil society, that we will see enhanced cooperation with our two closest neighbors, the U.S. and Mexico, on our shared interests and concerns in the region, and other strong partnerships with key regional players, and that our commitment to multilateral regional organizations and institutions would continue to feature prominently. What we have now is the early stage of an evolution of our approach, one that is focused on partnership, capacity building, and effectively uses relatively modest resources to undertake sustainable, enduring engagement in a coherent and coordinated way to achieve mutual and reciprocal benefits. This will continue to be Canada's model for how we engage in the region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Before we go to questions, 20 minutes, give me 5. I think Arturo owes me a 5. Whoa! Anyway, the thing that strikes me about this Yep, sorry. The thing that strikes me about this conference is that a lot of stuff has been mentioned, and virtually every word of it has been valuable. In the traditional parlance, this has been a rich and productive time for all of us, I think. There's one thing that bothers me in this, maybe two. How many of you have children or are enough of a child that you might have read J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series? There are a few of you. In the Harry Potter series, the main, not protagonist, but antagonist in the whole series is one Lord Voldemort. He is such a nasty protagonist, such a horrible person, if you want to call him a person. So just scary, horrible, that no one dares speak his name. So it is he who cannot be named. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking here about something that a lot of people, including Hugo Chavez, have been talking about for quite a few years now. It's fourth generation asymmetric war. And whether we like it or not, whether we're prepared for it or not, or whether we want it or not, it's here, it's with us. We are dealing with it. We are engaged in a fourth generation asymmetric war. Now, what is war? War is the compulsion to accept the enemy's will, compulsion. In the past, under the tradition of the Westphalian treaties and the so-called Peace of Westphalia, the idea was that war was between two nation states, or maybe an alliance of nation states against another alliance of nation states, but it was a nation state sort of thing. And furthermore, it was a military sort of thing. flags flying, uniforms resplendent, crossing the sovereign borders of another country to take a province or a market or maybe the whole thing. But under current experience in the last, particularly the last 20 or so years, we found that that's becoming more and more obsolete, and what is more and more in vogue is the fourth generation asymmetric war. We do not want to admit, apparently, that we are engaged in such a war, and when we don't do that, we don't have to worry about, do we? But don't we? Yes, yes we do indeed. And the charge that Mr. Chavez gave to the officer corps in 2005 at the military academy in Caracas, when he charged every member of the officer corps in Venezuela to learn fourth generation asymmetric war and develop doctrine to deal with it. We are still stuck with Westphalia, pretty much, and our own thinking. And when we talk about defense, we talk about the uniformed forces crossing a sovereign border. But today, that's not happening. The last big confrontation of that nature, in Latin America anyway, took place when, Arturo? War of the Pacific, right? That was 100 years ago. But we have been engaged, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we like it or not, in a problem of fourth generation asymmetric war. What's the objective of fourth generation asymmetric war? It's not to crush another military organization or to destroy a nation's capability of fielding a military force abroad. The objective is to wear down, slowly but surely, the will of the targeted country for the purposes of? Say that again? Gaining influence. And eventually, beyond gaining influence, and probably more, not just eventually, but in reality, the real objective is to compel that enemy to your will. And whether that type of war is as bloody as traditional shock and awe or whatever, whether it's not as bloody as the World War II was, or Korean War was, or some of the other wars that we've all been engaged in were, the fact is that compulsion, whether it's more benign or not, is still compulsion. And something we ought to give some thought to. Now then, our objective is to control or strangely come to the point of influencing another enemy or entity to your will. The common denominator in all this is a thing we call destabilization. We don't run uniformed forces across borders anymore, or not very often anymore anyway. And military forces are not uniformed. They're not all male. They're also female. They're not all adult. They're also children. And we've got to understand these things, and we've got to deal with them. And the only way we can deal with them effectively is because, since they are transnational problems, what kind of solutions do we need? Ta-da! Transnational solutions. And Ambassador Einaudi has suggested not only that we go that direction, but we take another step further. We have to use brain power. Brain power is the main weapon in this context. Brain power. Smart power. It's not firepower. What took down the Berlin Wall? Tanks, artillery, airplanes? No, the German Deutschmark. Ta-da! Destabilization can take many forms, and usually it's relatively benign. But again, we have the problem of compulsion. And it compulses us to where, and what happened is the idea of the creation of a failing state. That's the other word that we dare not speak. War and failing state. We don't want to use the term because we may be politically correct enough so that we don't want to offend anybody. But the fact is that in some of these states we've been talking about in Central America and elsewhere, a good portion of the country is not controlled by the state. And that's a definition of sovereignty, a definition beyond what has been talked about here. Sovereignty is the control of the territory and the people of a given recognized political entity. If the state doesn't control all of its territory, the question is who does? We use the term ungoverned territory quite often. We've sophisticated that a tad, and now we're calling it alternately governed territory. But the point is, it's not the state that's doing this. It's non-state groups, belligerent, violent, and kind of nasty like Lord Voldemort. And over a period of time, you create a failed state. And then you can, with that, you can step in and take control of that state. Not only take control of it, but go a little beyond, perhaps. And then what happens to the state? It just doesn't wither away. It still exists. Somebody's going to have to take care of it if nobody comes in and takes control of it and runs away with it. Haiti comes to mind. Letting Haiti fail has been a terribly expensive process for the West. Other countries have been known to become criminal states. New People's Republics. In a situation like this, it's the last man standing, no matter how badly he's been beaten, the last man standing is the victor. And it's a little dicey, and I know that there may be some problems with this. I'm taking too much, not enough time, but too much in any case. But here, a couple of words for our vocabulary for the next while. War is compulsion, whether it's non-lethal or if it is lethal, maybe it's not as lethal as what we've known in the past. The other word is failed state or failing state. It's not an event, it's a process. And if you do it slowly and quietly enough, people will go to sleep, in the words of one of my favorite philosophers, Hugo Chavez. If you do this well enough, long enough, slowly enough, benignly enough, your enemy will wake up dead. Yeah. So, I know that everybody's ready. We have several people would like to ask questions. Are the microphones present? Okay, let's start over there and we'll work through this way. And please please do two things. First, address yourself to one of the panelists. Secondly, make it a question
Major Larumbe once again from WINSEC. Difficult challenge you just put on my table there, sir, because there's a lot of very good points throughout the panel. However, let me go back here in my notes. One of the points that I think has not been touched a lot, and the good general brought about, was strategic communications. It's the tying the actions with words, deeds and words, verba et facta. It's not about. I haven't seen that a lot. We've seen a lot of looking for capabilities, multidimensionality, interagency, intergovernmental, yet getting out that word that will tie our actions to something that can be measured later on to those who actually are paying the bill and those who actually matter, who is the taxpayer at any one of our countries. So, strategic communications.
Margaret?
Any words on it, ma'am?
Clearly, once we have our concept more fully clear to ourselves, then I think it's very important to communicate what that is. And in part, I think that's a phenomenon that occurs within these clusters, and it may advance at different, the quality of communication may advance differently amongst the different clusters of the region, perhaps aided and abetted by our friends of the Inter-American Defense Board. But I think we haven't made the concept sufficiently clear to ourselves to engage in strategic communication right now in the formal sense, unless it's in saying that, you know, we're in a hell of a mess, guys, we better get our act together at that. So I don't know if that's an adequate, and I think the other part of your question, that we undertake activities with an intent to see some result in the near, medium, or slightly longer time frame, like as Admiral Greenwood was saying. We want to see results over a longer period of time rather than just do things and hope that people like us because we're doing them. And we want to increasingly see partners assume some of the burden of continuing that activity with other partnerships as well. And I think that's a message. I mean, Jay raised this, is we haven't what was the word you used? The partnership is kind of a bland partnership concept. That's part of the message that we need to formulate, I think, here within our own country, and before we as Americans can begin saying, okay, what we want out of this partnership stuff that Secretary Panetta is talking about is A, B, C, and D. And oh, by the way, we need to agree with our partners what those goals are going to be as well. We can't do that just on our own. So I think our talking about our strategic communication needs to be based on a number of premises that are not yet well defined.
Okay, the next one's right here. I'll get you in a minute. You're about 15th in line.
Thank you. Max, I think maybe the other Voldemort in the room that we haven't spoken of is the individual. And the reason we're in a complex security environment today is that individuals can be either assets or threats. And in democracies, the link between the citizen and the government, that's legitimacy. And so I'd like to ask Colonel McNaughton, I'd like to direct this question to you, in thinking about the ways in which the United States is supporting increased or heightened security measures in countries in Latin America where still the relations between civilian law enforcement and military forces is still sensitive. Where do you see a consciousness or a manifestation of the U.S. concern about legitimacy for the civilians' views of those heightened security measures within the countries where we're supporting those kinds of measures?
Yeah, this won't take long because it's actually I don't get to speak on U.S. policy because we are just the implementers of the military arm of that. And it was mentioned yesterday, and I forget which ambassador talked about it, but it was really the country teams. Regardless of what Southcom's or Northcom's or whoever com's policy or their campaign plan is, and our component, my component job to carry it out, it will and always will be checked if it is out of line with any relationship sensitivities by the country team. Everything goes through the U.S. ambassador.
Okay, there was another one back here. Oops. This one first. We'll get you, don't worry.
Colonel Rodney Smart from Trinidad and Tobago. This is a comment to Margaret, and I'm attempting to speak on behalf of the small island Caribbean nations, attempting. First, I'd like to premise my thoughts on the old adage, a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And that when we segment the Caribbean, I've lost said yesterday, we have to understand that there are many Caribbeans, that the needs of these small islands chain, which may be our weakest link, might be a bit different from Brazil with 190 million, Colombia with 46 million, etc. But that if we do not strengthen those small islands, it might just be the point where we may have some weakness. Understand a small island like Trinidad and Tobago, as small as it is, produces energy for the region. And that if that remains unsecured, we may have some problems in North America and in South America. So I think we have to appreciate, and all the questions you asked, Margaret, I could answer from a Caribbean perspective, yes, that the American and Canadian and the Colombian and the Brazilian support to small island states is incredible, necessary as we go forward. In fact, we also must not discount when we come to the schools, what we learn and how we are able to go back and contribute. And also the relationships. You and I had a relationship, you and I had a conversation out in the corridor, and I asked you a question, and you said to me, you know, this is what you're trying to do in Trinidad and Tobago, this book may help you. And I was able to Google it one time and look at the person. And what I'm saying in a nutshell is do not discount what you do for the region. What America, Canada, the bigger countries have been able to do for small islands is tremendous. And we definitely need your support in order to continue to grow and to build. Thanks very much.
Is that a question?
No, I said it was a comment. I did say it was a comment. I did say it was a comment.
Okay.
And a good piece of advice as we seek to do crítica y autocrítica. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we get this guy back here.
Thank you, my friend Max. I don't see you in many years. First of all, thank you to all the panel for the great description of all these processes, especially the one that you mentioned, Max, about this compulsion of transforming the states in failed states being used and applied by Hugo Chavez. If I am not mistaken, this is called psychological operations and is considered a military weapon in the military doctrine. Is that right?
That's right.
And I much remember that you in Peru in the year 1990 that came to help us in the pacification plan to overcome the China Pact program to describe all these processes. And I think that's exactly what Chavez is doing in the region now.
Okay, thank you very much. There was, Rich, I think it's about time for getting you, and then we'll come over to this side in a minute.
Thank you. Richard Downey from the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. And I just wanted to add actually a question for Admiral Greenwood. And you didn't really answer the question about whether there was a Canadian model or not. You put up those tenets up there, but I wanted to add one point. When the Chief of the Defense Staff had visited, a couple of the things that you listed in the tenets were there, but one of the things that I think was absolutely critical, and I personally think there is a Canadian model, and it certainly you showed a lot of it, but one of the things that the CDS mentioned was, he said, whenever we make a decision about whether we're going to be involved in the Americas, we ask ourselves 3 questions. And the first was, is it in our interest? Is this something that that Canada would benefit from and we could add to? Secondly, can we add value? In other words, if the United States or somebody else is doing something, why would we do it? Or do we have some history involved with that relationship where we could add value? And third, can we add that value in a way that doesn't bust the budget? Is it economical? And I asked this question, disguising it as a comment. It's a comment disguised as a question. Would you agree that that should be part of the Canadian model? I really think it would be. I think it is a key part of it. But I think there is a Canadian model. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comment and the implied question. I don't disagree at all. I think what I laid out there was clearly we feel that we have an interest in the region. So that is, if you like, the umbrella of why. Whether we can have added value, I think that's maybe that was implied in it. As you recall, the 3 statements that we look at, our mantra is modest, enduring, and reciprocal. Modest is clearly the means test, the economical, in the sense of it's not going to be flash in a pan, but we'll be able, modest and enduring go together in that sense. Reciprocal is an important part of it because it's not just parachuting security assistance into the region, but is establishing that relationship, which is a two-way street. Okay, and it's not just here today, gone tomorrow. So there's that. So I think, yeah, the aspect of can we provide added value is a clear one, and that's also when you can't be everywhere. How do you decide where to be? Where we try and be is, in a sense, where you're not, because you have that much resource that the Canadian, if you like, asymmetry of scale is not going to make much difference if we're in the same place. If we're in some place where the U.S. is not, or where some of the other larger countries are not, then that's where we can provide some added value as part of the collective contribution. I think that also ties into a further point that I might have mentioned but didn't get around to is, in a number of cases, extra leverage can be had by not dividing up the region where it's sort of country by country engaging, but where like-minded teams of countries bring a composite team effort to bear in assistance. And I think that's another way of looking at it as well, multinational teaming of assistance.
So is there a Canadian model?
I think I'll still leave that to your consideration. I think my characteristics of a model is a Canadian model would be unique and would be sufficiently coherent.
Okay, General.
Buenas tardes, Armando Alanís del Ejército de Nicaragua. Ya está terminando el panel ahora, ya está terminando el coloquio y tenía una inquietud que a lo mejor no coincida con los panelistas, pero aquí tenemos un grupo selecto de estudiosos de la seguridad y que además tienen influencia en toda América. Precisamente ahora están trabajando un plan de seguridad apoyando a Guatemala. Y entonces quería introducirles un tema que podría no ser contestado, solamente es una inquietud que yo tengo. Desde hace unos años, pocos años, se ha trasladado a los países de América Latina un modelo de sistema penal a las legislaciones nacionales de nuestros países, moderno, de mucho valor para los ciudadanos, de la seguridad ciudadana, pero que también ha trasladado, es un modelo muy garantista y que le traslada la carga de la prueba a los estados. Parece basado en un modelo de países desarrollados con capacidades tecnológicas altas y con una infraestructura de los países muy desarrollados, cosa que no tenemos en nuestros países. Y eso, a mi parecer, yo soy abogado también, ha complicado un poco el tema desde el punto de vista jurídico del enfrentamiento al narcotráfico y al crimen organizado. Porque con sistemas de leyes así, con un Estado débil, desde el punto de vista tecnológico y de infraestructura, no tiene posibilidades, muchas posibilidades para aprobar, y en muchos casos estos individuos quedan libres, y ese es un problema que afecta a la seguridad porque no logra la efectividad requerida. Y eso tiene que ver entonces con revisar el sistema de estas leyes penales, estos sistemas penales, y el nivel operacional que nuestras tropas o que los sistemas de seguridad de los países, las policías tienen que desarrollar en nuestros propios países. Muchas gracias.
Next, over here, somebody.
Maria Teresa Nieto from Colombia. Colin, you spoke about all the best experience you got in the last 10 years helping Colombia and other countries in the region. How is the U.S. ensuring that that experience is not lost only in Southcom, but it's applied to Northcom, helping Mexico? Because I know that you answered that Mexico had asked for some visit to U.S. Army in the South Army. But how are you trying to coordinate both efforts? Because Mexico is clearly in the same challenge with the rest of the region.
Was that to me? If I understood the question, you want to know how the experience in Colombia is not being lost? No.
The experience of Southcom in Colombia is not lost in Northcom in Mexico.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Interestingly enough, at the COCOM level, they have initiated COCOM to COCOM staff talks. So, you know, we have Army staff talks, joint staff talks with other countries, but actually these, because of the critical aspect of the seam, or, you know, we